When the patient was brought to the hospital, the doctors immediately realized that the condition was critical. Already the first tests showed that the body was working on limit, and every delay can be fatal. The medical team worked non-stop. Hooked equipment, prescribed intensive treatment, did everything that protocol and human experience allows. But time, it went, but there was no improvement. On the monitors, the numbers seemed to freeze. Each new indicator was worse than the previous one. The room felt the tension, the very thing when even the most confident word of a doctor turns into an empty sound. For several hours of struggle, the senior doctor gathered a colleague to enter the ward. His face was tired, but not just physical. It was the fatigue of a man who realizes that his knowledge and skills have hit a wall. He looked at the command, at the parents standing nearby, and quietly pronounced the words that everyone is afraid of. "We are nothing more. We can't do it." These words hung in the air like a heavy weight. The patient's mother covered her mouth with her hand to restrain it. Sob. Father clenched his fists so hard that his knuckles turned white. It seemed that the entire space around became cramped and cold. Everyone understood that since the doctor said this, then the situation was really critical. This is not an attempt to console or prepare it. An honest confession of a professional who has gone through hundreds of similar cases. And yet, such moments never get easier. Some of the nurses looked down because they knew this. A stage when hope seems to go out like a weak light bulb. No one dared to be the first to break the silence. Relatives were waiting at least. A tiny hope, some alternative plan, a miracle of medicine. But the doctor honestly told them that the border has been reached. A proposal was made to call a priest or give the family the opportunity to say goodbye if they want. It was the last, most painful human honesty. At that moment, time seemed to stop. His parents were relatives, even the doctors themselves, but everyone was facing what they so desperately wanted to turn away from. And yet, when it seems that a step has been taken into the void, sometimes something happens that no one could have predicted. But it was before that. For a moment, everything looked as if hope had completely disappeared, and the participants in the scene were already resigning themselves to the inevitable. It is in this moment of silence that, with heavy breathing and tears, the story of a miracle begins that will later change everything. When the doctor pronounced those heavy, saying that there was nothing more they could do, a deep spiritual silence fell in the corridor. Everyone stood as if stone. Even the devices in the neighboring wards seemed quieter than usual. Relatives were immersed in shock, doctors in theirs, professional impotence, and the nurses quietly looked at each other. I don't know what to say, but suddenly I heard a slight step, the same sound that was louder than any scream in the tense silence. A small figure detached itself from the wall. It was a boy who stood silently next to him all the time. He was not a doctor, he was not a relative of the patient. He was someone who, usually adults do not notice at such moments, believes that children do not understand the depth of what is happening. But this boy saw and felt everything perfectly. The despair of adults and hopelessness, and the coldness that settled in their hearts. He looked at the pale face of the man in the hospital bed, and something inside him disagreed that. Everyone just gave up while the adults discussed further formalities. The boy suddenly stepped forward. His small hands were trembling, but there was a confidence in his eyes that rarely, you can even find it in adults. He looked at the doctor, then at his parents, and said quietly but clearly, "Let me try it, please." At first, no one even understood what he said. The parents turned around in surprise, the nurses froze, and the doctor knitted his brows. After all, in his practice, none of the children had ever made such statements. But the boy stood there, evenly, without looking away. There was not a drop of capriciousness, tears, or fear in his voice. Only a firm belief that he has to do something important. The doctor cautiously, almost gently, tried to explain that the situation was serious. That medicine is powerless, that there are no methods left but observation. But the boy repeated again, "Please, let me." And at that moment, adults began to feel something that cannot be expressed in words, as if in his presence there was a faint, barely perceptible warmth, a small spark against the background of general darkness. His confidence was not desperate, not nervous. She was quiet, pure, sincere, the kind that makes even adults silent, and the boy took a step closer to the bed. The parents looked at each other, and in their eyes one could read doubts, fear, but also question. What if this childish faith is able to do what the drugs could not do? They understood that they no longer lose anything. For them, this was the last opportunity, no matter how strange it looked. Even the human doctor, accustomed to thinking in logic, protocols, and statistics, felt that it was impossible to resist this simple human impulse is wrong. He saw in front of him not just a child, but a small person who wants to help, despite the fact that all the adults have already resigned themselves. And when the doctor nodded, hesitantly, but still aloud, something changed. A bright shade of hope has appeared, the same one that is born not from science, but from the depths of the human heart. When the doctor finally nodded, allowing the boy to come over, everyone seemed to hold their breath. The boy stepped toward the bed slowly, almost solemnly, as if he knew he was doing something important. In his movements there was vanity or fear. There was only caution and a sincere desire to help. He walked over to the man who was lying motionless and just stood there for a moment, peering into his face, as if trying to hear what none of the adults heard. He then reached out and gently took the patient's palm. A small child's hand in a weak adult's hand, looked particularly fragile. But it was in this fragility that there was some kind of unexpected power that comes not from physical power, but from the purity of intentions. The boy closed his eyes. He called for help loudly, did not make sudden movements. He just quietly said words that were not medicine, but were something deeper. Sometimes it sounded like a whisper of prayer, sometimes it sounded like talking to a person, as if he was trying to get through to that frequent soul that has not yet given up. He said that they were waiting for him, that he was not alone, that there are people nearby who he is loved. He spoke from the heart, without templates, without complex terms, as only a child can speak, whose soul does not yet know the boundaries of doubt. The parents looked at this scene, not believing their eyes. At first nothing happened, and they feared that everything would remain hopeless. But after a few minutes, the monitors began to show barely noticeable changes, tiny, microscopic, but real indicators which were steadily deteriorating suddenly began to rise slowly. The nurse was the first to notice this and called the doctor in shock. He looked at the screen, then at the boy, then at the screen again. He frowned, not with irritation, but with surprise. The pulse became a little smoother, breathing a little deeper. Until recently, the skin was almost bloodless, acquired a slight shade of warmth. It was completely, a little, but in a world where every metric could make all the difference, it was a huge step. The boy continued to hold the patient's hand, as if he was passing it on. Something important to him: faith, warmth, the desire to live. He did not know medical terms, did not understand complex processes, but I felt intuitively that I was giving this person a piece of my own power. And the most amazing thing is that this power has reached. When the patient opened his eyes, it was barely a moment in which everyone present literally stopped. Breathing, the parents froze, the nurses instinctively pressed their hands to their chests, and the doctor, a person of strict rules and calculations, stood absolutely stunned. It was a small but real miracle, unscientific, inexplicable by formulas. It was a miracle, a pure human connection, one that adults often forget, but children feel with all their hearts. From that moment on, history has changed. The hope that had disappeared a few minutes ago had returned, bright, alive, real. And it all started with one bold step and the boy's words, "Let me try."